Welcome, I'm Stacy, Education Program Director here at Golden Artist Colors, and today we're going to look at a limited palette that is designed to give you a little bit of a mixing capability to explore the beautiful spring colors that we're seeing here in upstate New York. We're finally starting to see spring. I'm looking out the window right now and there's this beautiful fresh green of the grass. It's a little rainy today. But we have a palette today that we're going to explore in 3 different paint lines for you. It's going to be kind of fun to see how these different pigments perform through our Williamsburg oils paint line, as well as our open slow drying acrylics and our QoR watercolor. And our specialist, our material specialist for our QoR brand, actually selected these colors, and it's been a joy mixing them out and seeing what they can do. So let's go ahead and have some fun mixing color, and hopefully this will be informative and enjoyable for you as well. Okay, thank you. All right, so this is a quick shot of the palette with the open and the Williamsburg. Since that body of the paint actually tints best with the addition of white, we've pulled that into the palette. But with the watercolor, you can just use dilutions to get those lighter values. So the palette is green gold, which is a really beautiful, transparent glazing color. It also will mix beautifully, almost as a yellow in a primary, and I'll show you that. It's a really interesting pigment and color. We have Quinacridone Magenta for our red family, our Cerulean Blue for our blues, and in the open it's the Cerulean Blue Chromium. In our QoR line and our Williamsburg, it is Cerulean Blue French. And I'll show you that they're actually all a PB36 pigment, but just know the difference in the naming convention there. Cobalt green is another color that we've included, and raw umber. So let's go ahead and do a quick demonstration here of mixing with these colors, using first the primary triad and mixing some secondaries, and showing you a little bit of the power of changing temperature with that cobalt green and neutralizing with that raw umber with the open. And then when I'm done, we'll go ahead and show you how those mixtures played out with QoR and Williamsburg when we do this color wheel. And we'll do that this whole demonstration. We'll show you in one brand or one paint line, and then we'll show you with the others through a projection on the screen. So let's go ahead and get started. While I'm doing this, if you have any questions, you can ask them in the chat. We have one of our material specialists there maintaining that chat, and we'll answer your questions while we're here live. And if you have questions anytime, you can email us at help@goldenpaints.com, and we have a team of specialists that'll be happy to help you with any of your materials-related questions. All right, so let's have some fun. This is obviously, this is the titanium white, so we'll use that in a little bit to do some tinting. But first, this is our green gold. When I pull this out, you can see that that undertone of that color is really, really bright. I mean, I see spring already. When I look out the window at this really bright, beautiful green field out here where we are in upstate New York, I see that color right away. And just some minor modifications to cool it down or darken it can be made very easily. You can also see that that undertone of that color is really, really leaning towards yellow. So we're going to use that as our yellow in the palette when I do this color wheel here shortly. Let me go ahead and pull down the Quinacridone Magenta. You'll see how icy cold that red is. It almost leans to violet. That'll help us create some really beautiful, cool tones when we get into our mixtures, and violets with that blue. It's just a beautiful, beautiful red, and also a beautiful glazer. This is our Cerulean Blue. And you can see that bright, beautiful sky blue right there. And when I hit that with this green gold, you're going to see some magic happen there in a little bit. All right, then our cobalt green. This is that soft, dark, muted, almost a little neutralized, beautiful textural pigment. In watercolor, the sky's a granulator, and it's absolutely a beautiful addition of texture. You can use it to neutralize some of your cooler tones, your magentas and your blues. You can also use it to get different types of variations on your greens. It's a really useful color in this palette. And then raw umber, which is wonderful for just getting some neutralizing colors. You can use it as a black replacement. You can mix it with the blue to get something that's like a a nice stormy gray. It's a terrific color to have for its versatility on the palette. So let's do some quick mixing, and I'll do that color wheel, and we'll show you what the colors look like in the other brands as well. I mean, excuse me, the other paint lines as well. All right, so we have our green gold. Just going to go ahead and place that here. I'm going to pull it down. You can see the undertone of that green gold. Okay, and I'm going to create a tint very quickly with a little bit of white over here on the palette. And I'm joined here today with our producer who's helping me out with the camera work. So thank you so much for being here. We also have our material specialist answering questions in the chat. And then I have some new material specialists that are hanging out and training with me today. And you might see some hands in the shot. So if you do, that's them. So here we go. There we go. So that's a tint of that color. Looking good. So I'm going to go ahead and make a few more pulls really quickly of these other colors to show you the primaries, and then we'll do some mixtures. All right, so here's the Quinacridone Magenta. You can see that undertone. Oops. Excuse my hand there, guys. And I'm just going to make this very quickly. I won't tint the secondary mixtures just in the interest of time, but I just want you to see what these look like. All right, so here's my blue. Oops. And so those of you that are in the chat, what's it like in your area? Because we've got spring just coming now, and I know where my daughter lives, they've had spring for a little bit. Trees are all blooming. I have family in Florida, and they're almost in summer. There we go. So there's my primaries. And now I'm going to show you what the secondaries can do. I'll leave a little white on that palette. It's okay if I get a tint. I just want to give you an indication of the range of this palette. So I'm going to just not nuance this too much, but you can see a nice middle blue, green there with the combination of the green, gold, and the blue. My orange is going to be quite warm because I don't have a true yellow. I'm mixing it with the green, so it'll slightly neutralize, but it still works as an orange. In this palette, you don't see a lot of really hot red in our landscape right now, so this would work. If I add white, I would get a bit of a peachy color. And you'll see later when I'm mixing to match some florals what I get. Let's see how that neutralized down to a brown a little bit, that undertone can really glow. All right, so then I'm getting over here to make my violet, and this violet is outstanding. And I'm just trying to go quickly here. There we go. Take a little bit more blue in there. Now, open acrylics are our slow-drying acrylic paint. The paint that is on my palette was actually put out 3 hours ago, and you can see how it's absolutely creamy and ready to go. It is not just a regular heavy body paint with the addition of an additive called retarder. It is actually a slow-drying acrylic that was formulated for this purpose. And you can see when I was mixing here up close, Todd, if you could jump down, you can see the viscosity of this paint. It's very, very soft and creamy. It's going to lay a little differently than your heavy body, but it's just a wonderful, wonderful paint to work with. And you're seeing a transparent paint there. That Quinacridone Magenta is a wonderful glazing color. So here's your violet, and you can see it leans a little towards red in my mixture, but you can adjust that either way, and it makes a beautiful violet. So this is basically our color wheel for this palette. We'll get into subtle mixtures and matching here in a minute. Just want to show you this cobalt green. If this is not going to get you the right green, the introduction of the cobalt green is a wonderful way to adjust those greens. There's so much green in the spring palette. Also, this is a wonderful addition of texture and core, as well as a great neutralizing color. And then again, the raw umber. It's another neutral that will add some depth to the palette. So if you want to go ahead and take a quick look at the same kind of mixing scenario here with QoR, our watercolor brand, you can see that granulation of that cobalt and the dilution at the top. as well as the Williamsburg mixtures there off to the, what is my right. Okay, awesome. All right, let's keep going. I'm going to go ahead and switch out my palettes. We're going to mix in Williamsburg here next. Thank you. All right, we're good. Thank you. All right, so we have this beautiful picture of some blossoms. And when I saw this, I thought, oh, I wonder if I can get that peach kind of red color to match. And I was able to do it pretty easily, so I'm going to show you that. Here's the palette in Williamsburg. We have our titanium white, again, for our tints, the green gold, the Quinacridone magenta. Again, this is Cerulean blue French in this line, so it's got a little different name. But the Cobalt, excuse me, the Cerulean is still the PB36 on there. The pigment's the same. Cobalt green and raw umber. So I'm going to just move these and get to mixing. All right. So I'm going to match here first, and then I'm going to swatch it out. Let's see. Let's go ahead and start with the blue. So this blue is it's a photograph, and then it's been printed, and now you're seeing it on a screen. So we're going to get as close as we can given all of those different factors. But when I pull this Cerulean blue French out, you'll see it's very, very dense, and it's very, very dark. But when I pull it and scrape it, you can see that undertone starts to get pretty close to that sky color. So what I'm going to do is start first by adding white to this color, my titanium white, to lighten it and create a tint. And see how close I can get with that tint. Now, if your paint is really, really dense, a little addition of oil will loosen it up. And you can also glaze with these colors. So if you find that mixing white changes the color in a way that just isn't as luminous, you can always work over a lighter ground with glazes. And we're not going to get exact, but we're going to get close. So the value of the color is pretty close when you see that on the screen. If I wanted to adjust this color just a tiny bit, I could add a tiny, tiny, tiny tip of the blade of Quinacridone magenta to lean towards violet, or the teeniest drop of the green gold if I felt like my sky needed to be a little warmer and lean towards green. But for this, I think we're pretty close. I'm going to leave it here for now. So let's go ahead and take a look at those petals of the flower. So my magenta is so strong. Look, I'm going to pull this magenta out. I mean, wow. It is such a strong color. So while I have this intense magenta, I'm going to try to mix some of these more intense colors that we see in the flower, this little orange bit here, and then from there I'm going to tint and find my lighter color. So with this magenta, I'm going to pull out just a little bit of this green gold, just a tiny, tiny bit on the tip of my knife, and mix that into the Quinacridone magenta. And just a little at a time, I'm going to warm up that color. And you can see already how hot that got just from the teeniest bit of green gold, right? Look at that. Now the undertone has changed from this sort of hot pink to that little bit warmer red. I think we're pretty close. We're pretty close. I'm going to leave it for now. I can adjust it later. I'm going to make a tint of that, take a little of what's left on my knife. And now I see that pink really rise. I could warm that up just a tiny bit more. It also neutralizes it a little bit. Ooh, look how powerful that green gold is. So I'm getting into almost it's really warming up and neutralizing a little bit, which is going to be really lovely for my flower petals. But it's too dark, so I really need to add quite a bit more white. And it looks like I had a tiny bit of blue in there, but it won't hurt. There we go. All right, so let's swatch these out. So here's my panel. Here's my petal color. Too dark, isn't it? and make that a little lighter. I'm going to add just a little white right here. There we go, and I will pull that out with a little oil in a moment. We're getting very close. You can see how you can keep adjusting that, and you would be on that color. The other piece I'm going to show you is that sky color. Pull that down right in here. That's pretty darn close. And then this hot sort of reddish color in here. It's a little too juicy. I would probably neutralize that a tiny bit with that brown. Just a tad. There we go. You can start to see how the brown influences that color a little bit. And finally, the stem, I could probably just go with my, raw umber straight out of the tube and then just play with that with a little bit of this red. So I got pretty close there with my mixtures, and that's a pretty simple one. We'll get into some more complex ones in a moment. All right, so let's go and take a look at how the mixtures turned out with QoR. There's QoR, our watercolor brand, and then also our Open in a moment, which is our slow drying acrylic. Fantastic. So we're going to do some watercolor mixtures here next, which is fun. And then we'll end with another Williamsburg and another Open. Okay. I hope everybody's having a great day. Look at that pretty landscape in the photo. Those flowers are so nice. Okay, so I went ahead and made some mixtures ahead of time just to show you. We have photographs of them as well. The wet versus dry. With watercolor, that's a sensitivity that is pretty important to note. What I'll do is I'll try to match the same pattern of mixtures when I paint out, but you can already see how this sort of granulating cobalt creates a wonderful textural opportunity in your palette, and it also speaks to those cooler undertones in the brush here and here. We have that green gold really creating that pop of these lighter tones you have in the greens. Yeah, there you go, right up close in here, that sort of bright spring green. And then you have your Cerulean and your Quinacridone Magenta, just absolutely creating these gorgeous little versions of violet blue in the flowers. And it's something to get at that's pretty easy. So let's go ahead and take a look at that, and hopefully that'll be helpful for you. Okay. So I'm going to put my dry examples here for a minute, and we'll just go ahead and get to work. Okay, terrific. All right, so let's go ahead and start with this green gold. What a color. All right, so bright in that undertone, and yet it can be this mossy kind of green in the mass tone. So I'm going to move this up a little bit. Here we've got that mass tone is just green, right? But then the magic happens in that undertone. Here we go, look at that. So beautiful. Okay, so you can see how that color would be helpful on the palette right away. And as it dries, it does mute a little bit, but it still stays pretty bright and gorgeous. So I'm going to go ahead and take a little bit of the raw umber, and I'm just going to trail it along that edge so you can see how it starts to bloom and warm up that green gold a little bit. Very active, beautiful paint. Let's go ahead and take a look at the Cerulean blue. And the Cerulean blue is over here. Mass tone is very like true blue, beautiful color. What's really exciting is when that Cerulean blue hits that green gold. Clean out my brush here. And as we pull that across the surface, and those get together, you really start to see that bright spring green that you see in the foliage, where the light is permeating the leaf, right? So it's a very, very nice combination to have on a palette if you're really trying to get to those bright, clean greens. But we can also take a look at the Cobalt, which is going to give you a really different effect. That Cobalt green is a pretty decent granulator. and it can also be used to neutralize color. So that's the cobalt green in the mass tone. I'm going to clean out my brush and dilute this so you can see that granulation come forward. There we go. Very sensitive color that's not a strong tinting color. You can overpower it with some of these colors on the palette. So if you're going to add, say for example, a Quinacridone Magenta and neutralize this to get to a sort of gray violet, which you can do, that Quinacridone Magenta is in that Cobalt. They'll play nicely together, but you won't need as much of the Quinacridone Magenta as the Cobalt because it's just a staining color and it's going to kind of overtake that Cobalt a little bit. But if you're cognizant of that, you can get some beautiful, beautiful neutral colors out of that. Okay. Finally, a really easy neutral to create. So if I'm looking at this painting and I want to create some browns that actually look more like they're turning towards black, is I can take my blue, my cerulean blue, and I can paint that cerulean blue in my dish and mix it with some of my umber, and I will get a neutral gray. Maybe not a true neutral gray, but I'll be able to neutralize my blue to a gray. It feels a little bit like a kind of like a stormy sky. There we go. And it will read as a black in your painting, or a dark, dark gray if that's what you prefer. And if I let that color down in a wash, I can almost get to some of those really graphic, moody, textural shadows that we see in areas. Now the flowers themselves are really going to be that blue with just a tad of that Quinacridone Magenta. So I'm just going to do this over here and move on. So here we go. We've got the blue. I'm going to take just a tad of this Quinacridone Magenta. I'm going to move it towards the blue, and I'm really going to take some of that off my brush because it's so powerful. I just need to adjust this blue just enough to darken it so that it really starts to lean a little bit more towards violet without going all the way to purple. And then I will get myself right into that color of the field of flowers there. You can start to see it right in that area. Well, that was fun. Great, terrific. So let's go ahead and take a look at this in open. Same palette. It can do so much. And then also Williamsburg. Great. Let's go ahead and do some more watercolor painting real quick. Thank you. All right. So I have QoR Live right here, so remind me of what I'm doing. All right, so this is way more chromatic than my little example here. What I was trying to do is really see how much I could take this palette of really high chroma colors and neutralize them to get, you know, some of these more sensitive reads like in the clouds here, because I can get that blue, we know that, it's here. But can I get to that color, or can I get to that color? And the answer is, yeah, I think you could. So I have some mixtures here, and I have some examples here of the mixtures that I'm about to do dry versions of here. So you can see that I'm getting to it pretty close, right? I have some examples that do work to read like the tones in the cloud. So let me show you how I got there, okay? All right. Sorry about that, I didn't have my paper ready. All right. So you saw the very bright colors, but we can mix them in a way that will neutralize. So first I'm going to go for this gray over here, and then I'm going to add a little bit of violet to it to get you some of the little bit, I don't know, more in this range. Then we'll take that same neutral and we'll tweak it a little bit by adding some of the green gold to get into this sort of, you know, yellowish, greenish color that we see from the sun that's probably somewhere over here, you know, pushing that warmth into the bottom end of the cloud. So let's go ahead and start by creating the neutral I just showed you in the last demo with the blue and the umber. So I'm just going to pull this. Again, I'm going to dilute this so you can see a more sensitive wash. My brush is a little dirty, so forgive me, my watercolorist, but that's how it goes sometimes when you're demoing. A little bit of umber here. I'm just going to put a little bit, and then I'm going to kind of pull that into this so you can see it neutralize. There we go. You can already start to see that gray come up, but this gray is much warmer and not as violet as that, so we'll start to change the color and the temperature as we go. So I'm going to pull more blue in, cool it down, start to see those grays develop. And now I'm going to sneak a little bit of the violet in there. Just a teeny bit, right? And see how this starts to change it as well. And that violet is so powerful, so when you're mixing, be aware of that. A little goes a long way. There we go. And I still need to keep neutralizing this. Now this is a neutral with the blue, the violet, and the brown. Okay? It's still rather violet. I almost feel like I need to keep pulling that blue and that brown over, which I'm getting to the right color now, where I start to see this color under here. Now if I wanted to, I could also play with a version where I take my green, my cobalt green, to be clear, here's my cobalt green, and a little bit of that violet, Quinacridone violet, and I have a gray here as well, and this gray, because it has the cobalt green, which is a granulating color, will also have a bit of texture when it dries, which can be really a beautiful addition. Now if I wanted to get to a gray that has a little bit of that greenish cast, I can start again with my Cerulean, and I can work in my brown, creating a neutral, and just sneak in a little touch, just a little teeny touch of my green gold, and I'm going to keep adjusting this on the paper instead of the dish. There we go. There we go. Now I have this sort of muddy green color, and if I dilute that and pull that out, I'm going to start to get these grays that are in this area of the cloud pull out, like in here. So when that starts to dry, and I can keep adjusting that, I can get those neutrals up in here. Sometimes that's the hardest part of the painting to get. You know, it's easy to find these high chromatic, bright colors. But when you start to get into these subtleties, that can take a little time to develop. All right, so let's take a look at some of the mixtures of the clouds with our other paint lines. I kept saying brands before, but we're all golden artist colors. Isn't that cool? Like this is our oil line. It's Williamsburg. You can see those mixtures there. And open is our slow drying acrylic line. And you can see them there. Fantastic. So I have another mixture I'm going to do with Williamsburg, and then one with open, and then we're going to be done after those two for the day. And I hope you have enjoyed this, because color mixing can be so satisfying. Okay, so back to my Williamsburg palette. And really, I think we've covered like a lot of the greens. We've covered a lot of the sort of obvious blues, but I want to get into some of these strange sort of orange colors. So that's where I'm going to focus here. But when you see the Williamsburg, excuse me, this is the Williamsburg. When you see the open and the QoR palettes pop up when I'm done, you'll see more mixtures of the greens and whatnot. But I think in order to keep this demo moving, and after we've sort of gone through some of these, I'm going to go to this family of colors and just this sort of funny neutralized area over here, these sort of peachy colors, and see what we can get, how close we can get. Okay, so before we did mix a pretty warm, muted color over here that's brownish on the palette. I'm going to do a tint of that really quickly to see where we were. That was basically the Quinacridone Magenta and the raw Umber combined. And I'm going to take some white and do a tint of this color. It's so dark that it's a little hard to see without the tint. And I'm going to get this really beautiful muted rose. So this is Quinacridone Magenta and raw Umber. This is a color right here that can work as a nice base for creating some neutrals in here. And some of these funny little violets and sort of hazy grayish tones I have around this part of the valley. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that color here. It's a very 1980s interior design color. I'm going to add a little tiny bit of the Cobalt green to this mixture, because why not? And a little bit more white. We know that that green can have a neutralizing effect. There we go. And it's not as warm as the brown. So your red and green are opposites on the color wheel. They tend to want to neutralize each other in general. So there's a color I can see right there in the landscape, right in here, right? So I can darken it with a little blue and a little green if I wanted to, but there's another version. You can see right in here. I can create lighter tints of that if I need to have some variety and value. There we go. Now I can warm this up as well to get to something a bit peachier. So if I went right to my Quinacridone Magenta, I would get something so bright because that color is so intense. And that's not what I need to do. I need to actually neutralize this and keep it in a family of more muted colors, but at the same time warm it up. So I'm going to go to that green gold, which the green is, you know, opposing the red a bit, so it's going to neutralize it, but that bright yellow undertone is going to give it that sort of warmth that is not something you would get by just mixing a brown with it. And I'm getting into these sort of rusty colors that you would see in this part of the landscape, right? So we'll just swatch that out. Ooh, that's pretty close. Let's not lie. We have a great tool. If color mixing is a challenge for you, on our website, and even if it's not, this is a super fun tool to play with and to sort of put you in the right direction if you're trying to develop a palette, and that is our color mixer. And it's a wonderful tool. It's on our Golden website. And when you're working with single pigments like this, although the binders are different in the paint, which will affect how you see the color a little bit, you can still use that tool for any of the paint lines to sort of get you started on how to mix. So if you have a single pigment color, you know it's going to behave similarly across the different paint lines. Not the same though. I wouldn't want to make that claim because an oil paint is going to, you know, have a little different look than an acrylic paint and watercolor as well. But as far as finding and identifying color, it can get you started. So here's this really beautiful ruby red color. And I'm going to tell you, with this palette, I will never get that hot, but I could glaze over a lighter color with some oil and get very, very close. If I mixed white, it would have a different effect than a glaze. And I'll show you what happens if I mix white with this color. But here's your little, whoops, I had a little white on my knife. So you can see this color right here, and I just pull it out with a little oil, how a glaze would keep the warmth of that color. Whereas if I add white, the titanium white will tint this in a way that sort of, I don't know, flattens that color. So here's a tint of that same color. And granted, it's a very light tint because I'm about out of the color on my palette, but you get the idea. It changes it completely. I'll actually go in here and do it real quick. So that's white to the same color. Sometimes a glaze is the best way to retain the luminosity. Okay, great. That was Williamsburg. So let's take a look at the same example. There's open. And then we'll go ahead and take a look at it with QoR. Just hang on to that, okay? I mean, put it on the table, but doesn't go in the trash. So, oil paints. In your own studio, I don't know how it is for you guys, but if you paint with oils, you know, you have to make sure they're dry before you stick them in a trash that you're not emptying right away. If you need to store rags, like when you're cleaning up, rags with oil paints on them really should be handled in a different way than just wadded up and thrown in the trash, because they can combust, so you want to make sure you put them in a container with water and you dispose of them. So that's what I was just directing us to hang on to those rags, because I'm going to take care of them differently. All right, so I'm going to switch over to our open, and this will be our last demo. So hopefully this was fun to watch. I mean, it's been fun to make. So I'm going to get back into my open acrylics. So we have a palette of those that'll be here in just 1 second. You're the best. Thank you. So here's my open acrylic palette. And it's really easy to see how this is going to translate to that landscape. So I gave myself harder demos to start with, and I'm just going to do this one really quickly. I'm going to make a few greens and then get to this area in here, which might be a little bit more challenging for someone who's just starting to mix. And I'm just going to mix with my brush to keep it going here. So the green gold, obvious choice, right? Look at that. Really easy. It brushes out as a glazing color, nice and thin and luminous. I can get to my bright greens right in here. If I add a little bit of white to that color, keep in mind white does change the color, but because it is a glazing color, it's transparent, it's a beautiful mixer. It has a really bright, luminous mixture, and I can blend with this open all day long because it's a slow-drying acrylic. Beautiful blender. There we go. So you see that color is pretty obvious. Now I can change the temperature of that a little to the left, a little to the right, a little warmer, a little cooler by adding my blue or my red to that mixture. So I'm just going to add a little bit of the blue in here just to show you how cooling that green gold down will start to get you into these areas. Again, I can bring in a little brown to neutralize, or a little of the cobalt green to get those little darker passages. And then when I want to get up into these areas where it's very cool and a bit darker, that's when I would really lean heavily into my cobalt green and mixing it with my cerulean blue, and possibly neutralizing that mixture with a tiny bit of red or brown, depending on which way you want to go. So I'll do both. Here's a tiny bit of my red, which is my Quinacridone Magenta. You see how that starts to neutralize? But it doesn't completely go to like it still stays in the green family. It just warms up a bit and grays down a bit. So that might be good for areas like in here. But then if I want to get really cool, like back in here, then I really don't want to go to my green gold. I'm going to want to maybe lean in, if I need to neutralize or darken, into my Umber. And I really should be giving you guys a little bit more paint on this palette to do this here. Let me see. And my Umber. Sorry about my arm there, everybody. There we go. So that's the Umber, the Cobalt, and the blue, the Cerulean blue. And I'm going to do a little tint with that. Add a little white in there. And you can see how it's in the gray family. So I can get to some of the colors that are in those trees, but then I have some that are very, very cool, and I just lean more into my blue for those. Okay? And you can see that I would use similar mixtures to get my atmosphere and my sky back in here. Also the green gold in here with just the tiniest bit of just a whisper of that Quinacridone Magenta, just to warm it up the slightest, can get you some of that sunny, bright green back in the further middle ground of this photograph. All right, so thank you for joining us. We're not quite done. I have a few examples. And then I want to remind you that we have material specialists that you can reach out to at any time. But here's our QoR, and here's our Williamsburg examples. Thank you so much. Here's our, oh, there we go. Thank you, Todd. There's our contact information. If you have any questions about color or how to use products, or need help with applications, please reach out to our specialists at help@goldenpaints.com, and there's our phone number and our website. And I hope this was a good time for you. It was really fun to mix these colors and show you what this limited palette can do. I wish you all the best. Enjoy your spring. Spring's a great time, new beginnings. Wishing you well, and thanks for joining us. Take care.